So what are you preaching on? Throughout the years, I've heard that question just a few times. Normally, that question comes while engaging with someone in the life of the church as they are preparing to worship, and they want to know, what's the theme? What are you preaching on this Sunday? I often get it, though, from members of the staff as we are gathered for our time of worship planning, and they want to know in a phrase or two what I'm seeking to build on upon the Scriptures, upon the themes, so that we can select the music for each Sunday that supports the overall message that we're hoping to convey. See, we want people to leave Sunday morning knowing that they have indeed worshiped the Lord, but there's a theme that has been woven throughout the entirety of the service, from the beginning to the end. So what are you preaching on is a good question to ask when developing worship services. So what are you preaching on? The snarky side of me wants to say, Jesus. God. From the Bible. I mean, you would hope that your pastor is preaching on what? Jesus, God, and from the Bible. If I'm not, then by all means, don't let me come into the pulpit. Don't come back next Sunday, and don't tune in next week to worship. Live stream somewhere else. The answer, though, to that question depends upon the liturgical season that we're in, or if we're offering a sermon series. Certainly what's going on in the world today influences my approach to developing a message. It was theologian Karl Barth who stated something to the effect, preach with the Bible in one hand and the newspaper in the other. And so yes, what's going on in the world does influence the preaching. We want sermons to be relevant and to speak to what's going on in the world around us. In addition to what's going on in the world around us, what's going on in the life of the church, what's going on in our own lives certainly influences the way a sermon has been crafted and how it's delivered. And then there's a time in prayer, the time searching the Scriptures and commentaries to help me get a sense of what God is calling me to offer on any given Sunday. And so I hope throughout the year that you hear sermons aimed at offering hope in difficult seasons, sermons that proclaim Jesus is the light of the world, a light that the world cannot extinguish, sermons that are on relative subject matters like mental illness and the political divide and on social injustices and how our shape impacts our understanding and our responses. I would hope that you would hear sermons that offer encouragement and also an invitation to live out our faith as Christian disciples, sermons that not only inspire, but sermons that teach. I hope the messages can encourage us to rethink our views, and so that we're seeing the world through the lens of our Christian faith and not something else like our political leanings or our social and economic statuses. I hope there are times when sermons will provide some answers. I also hope that you'll have more questions and answers following any given worship service, questions that will propel you on a Spirit-led journey. I hope that there are sermons that speak of our God who comforts, but also some sermons that speaks of our God who disrupts. I hope you hear sermons preached that invite us to come and to gather and to hear about God's grace, but also sermons that tell us, go, get out of here and serve and share the good news of Jesus Christ. There are days when the sermons seem to be written by themselves, while others come through a great gnashing of teeth, a surrender of God to God as I shout, but I don't think I'm up to the task. Some come after hours of study and prayer, while others come after a full week, and Sunday morning has come. It's a quick deadline every week. That's a rather long answer to the question. So what are you preaching on? And now I have a question for you. Church, what are you preaching on? Another way of asking that question is, what are you sharing? Church, what are you sharing? What are you sharing when it comes to your faith, to your understanding of God, to your experience of God, to what's going on in the life of the church? Just what are you sharing? We all have a Jesus story. And this good news, it's meant to be shared. It's meant to be lived out. We may not all have the calling to preach, but we're all called to share our faith, to reach out in love, to minister compassion and care, to invite others to experience more and more of God in our worship and in our fellowship, in our learning and in our serving others in mission. So, church, what are you sharing? Just what are you revealing? What are you revealing to others about God? Do we talk about God who loves all, or are we selective in our approach and others may think that God only loves some? Do we speak of a merciful and loving God, or do we relay a God of vengeance? Do we experience a come as you are invitation to experience God's redeeming grace, or do others feel like they've got to get right with God and fit in better in order to come here and to fit in? See, what we share and how we share it truly matters. We're either inviting others to God's grace, or we're pushing people away. And if we are not sharing, the silence speaks words. And it can be deafening when the church doesn't share. As an elder in the United Methodist Church, I'm called to word, sacrament, order, and service, and I've been given authority to preach and teach. But we are all called to share the Jesus story. We all have our part in the general ministry of the church. We all have been baptized into the church, or all who've been baptized into the church receive the same calling to be faithful disciples of Jesus Christ. And as disciples, we gather for worship when we go forth to serve others, to share in the good news of Jesus Christ. I've been given the authority to preach and teach, but all of us, each and every one of us who are following in the way of Jesus, has a story that needs to be shared. So just what are you sharing? What do others know from you when it comes to God, to faith? What goes on here on a Sunday morning or during the week? Do the people in your neighborhood or the people you work with, do they even know that you are a Christian and that you worship at Centreville Church? You know, remember, when someone says to you, "I didn't know you're a Christian," that is not a compliment. It sounds like it. But what they might be saying is this: why have you never shared or invited others to know about what you know to be true? Why have I not seen faith and love from you in action until now? If you've experienced God's saving grace, then why are you withholding? You know, I remember years ago when we received a new bishop, he shared that in the first few months he was living in Richmond that people who were welcoming him to Virginia, they all asked him the same question. And the conversation had nothing to do with church or with Jesus or the Bible, nothing to do with informing him about where he should go to a local church or how he could share in a local mission experience. The number one thing that people wanted him to know: have you been to U-Crops? U-Crops is the equivalent of Wegmans. See, at the time, this was a grocery store chain in Richmond area that had raised the standard on grocery stores. And everyone welcoming him to Richmond wanted to make sure that he was informed. And they thought that sharing this information was the best thing that they could offer him by way of welcoming him and his wife to Virginia and sharing with him where he and his wife should buy groceries. Such a conversation was more than small talk. I mean, it did reflect an act of caring, an act of Southern hospitality, but it made him wonder why people were not more than willing to talk to him about where he might go to church now that he's living in Richmond. More than willing to talk to him about where he should buy produce than to invite them to worship on a Sunday morning or to invite him on a Saturday morning mission to offer produce to those who are facing food scarcities. You know, it is a common courtesy to share with others and to inform those who are new to our neighborhoods the very things that we like and enjoy. And so with relative ease, we share with them what? We share with them the best places to buy pizza. Where do you go to get good Korean barbecue? where do you go to get the groceries, what roads they might take that aren't as congested as others. Let me know. We share what golf courses to play, where the best thrift stores are to find good deals, and where they might want to venture for quick weekend getaways. All of this is good and wonderful and useful information. But what often happens is that the talk of faith, of Jesus, of God, the church, is not what we often speak of when welcoming others. And we don't want to come across as pushy, or we don't want to bring to the surface that which we believe is in the private realm. And we may get questions that we don't have the answer for. And so we may just remain silent when it comes to matters of faith. If we invite them, this means we better show up to greet them. We may also not wish to share, because what if they come and they worship, but then they don't come back, and that's going to be awkward. And instead of risking rejection, we might just remain silent. And yet every Sunday I am fully aware that there is a level of rejection that will take place when I'm preaching. But I'm also aware that there'll be people who will listen and to what is being offered in worship and what is being shared about God and God's love that will resonate, and people will worship again online. People will come back to worship in this place. Any preacher will tell you they face more rejection than those who will return to seek to unite with the congregation, and yet we preach on. Chances are great that when you speak of faith and you invite a friend or invite another person to church, you will be rejected. No one likes feeling rejected. Research tells us that it takes an average of 7 invitations for a person to respond by coming into the worship. That's a lot of rejection. But sharing our faith, sharing our story is so vitally important, not for the sake of the church, but for the ways people can connect with Jesus. Connecting people with Jesus happens when we share our story, when we share of our love of God and God's love for us, and we share the good news of God's saving grace in Jesus Christ. And you don't have to be perfect to talk about God who is. You don't have to have all the answers, even when inviting others to share on a journey of discovering more and more about God. You don't have to be charismatic or evangelical or have an outward glowing personality to share your story. For God can use each and every one of us to share from a place of authenticity, to share with our own voice, from our own experience. And yes, it might be experience of vulnerability, of our own experience of God's love and grace. God can use our stories of times when we were walking in the miry clay of sin, and God met us where we were, invited us then to walk with Jesus, who bore our sin, that we might walk free. God can use our story to help another who's had similar experiences. See, church growth used to happen when the understanding that if you build it and open the doors, people will just walk in. That attractional model is long gone. Spiritual growth and vitality come not with a preacher who offers the sermon 2 times on a Sunday, but when people in the congregation are willing to connect. When the people in the congregation are doing that faith sharing by listening to the stories of others and sharing out of our own. And if any church has a future, and all churches should have a future because of who Jesus is, and because of our willingness to share the story, if our church has a future, it will depend more and more on our ability to connect with others, seeking to build lasting relationships. And through those relationships with others, people find meaning and support and love and encouragement and acceptance, friends for the journey. Through our connecting with others and our sharing from our experiences and our stories, people will then, and that's where it's most important, will connect with Jesus and come to know of God's unconditional love and redeeming grace. This is the work of the church, not of a pastor or an evangelism team. Jesus had such compassion for others. What do we read in our gospel this morning? That he went to where the people were, to the cities, to the villages, to proclaim the good news of the kingdom. In our gospel lesson, we read that when he saw the crowds, he had compassion for them. And he read that he told his disciples, the harvest is plentiful, but the laborers are few. And he implored them to ask the Lord, send the laborers into the harvest. Such is true for us today. The harvest is plentiful. And we who are Christian, we who've been entrusted with the good news of Jesus Christ, we're called to do our part, to share our story, to go out into the world, to extend the welcome, to reach out in love, and through our willingness to connect with others, invite them to connect with our God. Phil Maynard, a church consultant in congregational development, writes about the vital work of what he calls incarnational hospitality. All of us who've experienced the grace and love of Jesus are to share in this work, and he describes incarnational hospitality as simply being the presence of Christ in someone's life. You're called to be the presence of Christ in someone's life, being the conduit of the love of God to someone else, allowing them to witness the power of the working of the Holy Spirit in our lives. And so I have to assume that most of us who are here this day or worshiping online, I have to assume that there have been people in your life who have been those conduits of God's love for you. And you can thank God for them, for their story, for your story, for the ways that they loved you and encouraged you and invited you on this journey. Faith comes by hearing, yes. Faith comes by sharing. We who have come to have faith can give thanks to God for those who loved us enough that they were willing to share their faith with us. They risked rejection. They didn't have all the answers. They were imperfect people, but their sharing and their caring made an eternal difference in our lives. And through our connection with them, we were invited to connect with our Lord, our God of love and of mercy, of forgiveness, of new beginnings, of new life. And so the challenge is before us to share with others, to create and make opportunities to connect with others. And this can happen not just when we gather for church events, but each and every day, wherever it is that you go, and the people that you share with on any given day. And as we go about our days, are we making ourselves available for God to use when we are as students in the school cafeteria, or in the golf pro shop, or at the local watering hole, or the gym? Through the common experiences of running and playing pickleball and biking and eating and bowling and crafting, fill in some more blanks there, we can take advantage of our common interest to share our faith with others in non-pushy, non-threatening ways. Phil Maynard writes that incarnational hospitality is the act of making room or space for someone in our lives, accepting them as they are, loving them as they are, getting to know them deeply enough through the sharing of their story, and letting them get to know us deeply through the sharing of our story. And that kind of sharing, it takes time. It takes consistency. It takes practice. It takes our willingness to care enough for another to extend that kind of hospitality. It takes our willingness to overcome our tendencies to leave such an effort to the evangelism team or the pastors and staff to engage in that kind of work. The discipline of sharing the good news of Jesus Christ is indeed an essential practice that needs our attention. Our faith grows as we share our story. Our appreciation of how God is at work in our lives deepens each time we tell that story. Our joy expands with others when others hear our story and we take time to listen to their story. So church, What are you preaching on? Or just what you're sharing? Just what are you sharing? Is it Jesus? Is it God? Is it from the Bible? No snark here. I sure hope so. Amen.